The town of Dieppe is a small, prosperous fishing port on the northern coast of France. At the height of World War II in Europe, a ferocious battle was fought on the beaches of Dieppe as Canadian troops scrambled to gain a foothold in Nazi-occupied Europe. On August 19, 1942, troops from the 2nd Canadian Infantry-Division, supported by British commandos and U.S. Rangers, prepared to launch a major raid on the German-held port. But the Germans were expecting the attack. They made sure that Dieppe was well protected by coastal guns and strongpoints. They were on the alert. When the Canadians landed, they came face to face with devastating Nazi firepower. Hundreds of men were cut down before they even got off the beaches. The story was much the same in the skies above Dieppe. The Allies had hoped to draw the Luftwaffe into battle and defeat it. But the Germans shot down twice as many aircraft as the Allies. When the order to withdraw was finally given, only a few Canadians could be extracted from the beaches. Almost 2,000 were forced to surrender to the Germans. The Allies' first major attack on occupied France was a disaster. Even worse, Allied hopes that the Dieppe raid would relieve German pressure on Russia were sadly misplaced. In June 1940, Hitler was master of Western Europe. His efforts to subdue Britain failed when the Royal Air Force defeated the Luftwaffe in the Battle of Britain that summer. Hitler then looked east. In June 1941, he launched Operation Barbarossa against the Soviet Union, the largest land offensive in history. The armies of the Wehrmacht almost triumphed as they plunged deep into Russia. But they stalled at the gates of Moscow, crippled by the fierce Russian winter. In the spring of 1942, the German offensive was renewed, and once again the panzers attacked the Russian heartland. Russia had strong defenses, but German pressure was relentless. In desperation, the Soviet Union turned to the Western Allies. Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov visited Britain and the United States and begged them to open a second front to draw German troops away from the east. But at that time, the Western Allies were in no position to do so. When the U.S. finally entered World War II in December 1941, Britain's Prime Minister Winston Churchill and President Franklin Roosevelt agreed to direct their efforts toward defeating Germany rather than Japan. Churchill reassured Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, but the Western powers needed time to build up their armies. They did not believe they could invade Nazi-occupied Western Europe until 1943 at the earliest. In the meantime, the Western Allies helped the Russians in two ways. They began to intensify their strategic bombing offensive against Germany. and British commandos conducted raids on the coast of Nazi-occupied Europe. During 1941, British commandos attacked German units in Norway on the Lofoten Islands. And at Vågsø on the mainland. Both raids were successful and prevented the Germans from deploying troops from Norway. To help the Russians by tying up more German troops in the west, the British now planned to mount larger operations against the coasts of occupied France. One of those targets would be the port of Dieppe. In 1942, Lord Louis Mountbatten was in charge of British raids on the coast of Nazi-occupied Europe.
When the Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, appointed me as Chief of Combined Operations, he gave me two major tasks. First, to continue raiding operations with the commandos, and secondly, to prepare for the invasion of the continent itself, because he said, unless we land and beat Hitler's armies ashore, we shall never win the war.
Mountbatten's headquarters also drew up plans for large-scale raids against the French coast to relieve German pressure on the Russians. One such attack was on the port of Dieppe. Codenamed Operation Ruta, it was to be a reconnaissance in force. Dieppe was a particularly attractive target because it was within easy range of fighters based in southern England. At the time, the German High Command was focused on Russia. France was regarded as a military backwater. The planners therefore believed that Dieppe was being defended by second-rate German troops who would not offer much resistance. However, the Germans had integrated Dieppe into the defenses of the Atlantic Wall. Powerful coastal batteries overlooked the town. These had to be eliminated before the main landings took place. The masterminds behind Operation Ruta proposed that paratroopers be used to neutralize these batteries just before the main assault on Dieppe. Near the French coastal village of Bruneval, airborne troops had successfully dropped onto a German radar station in February 1942 and destroyed it. They were confident they could do so again. To further lower Dieppe's defenses, the Royal Air Force would mount a bombing raid before the Allied landing. These bombers would also attack targets further inland to prevent German reinforcements from reaching Dieppe. The Royal Navy agreed to provide fire support for the raiders. However, the Royal Navy would not allow any ship larger than a destroyer to operate in the English Channel. It had lost a number of ships to German air attack during the Battle of Britain in 1940 and considered the risk to its warships to be too great. It made no exceptions for Operation Ruta. The plan dictated that once the paratroopers neutralized two key coastal batteries, a division-sized force would land on 4 beaches: blue, red, white, and green. General Bernard Montgomery, the overall army commander in southeast England, decided to use the Canadian 2nd Infantry Division for the raid on Dieppe. He did so for a reason.